Good evening, and thank you for joining us for the National Health Service Corps 2012 webinar series. Tonight's webinar is Transforming Burnout, presented by Dr. Alan Shelton. Dr. Shelton is Clinical Director at the Puyallup Tribal Health Authority in Tacoma, Washington, where he has worked as a family practitioner for more than 25 years. He is also a faculty member at Tacoma Family Medicine, a residency program. The goal of tonight's webinar is to discuss professional well-being and burnout, as well as share tools and resources for achieving true satisfaction and fulfillment at work. NHSC is pleased to offer continuing education units and continuing medical education credits of 1.5 hours for all disciplines participating in this webinar. To receive these hours, you must attend the full 1.5-hour session. Throughout the webinar, you will be required to respond to online poll questions to verify attendance. Once you respond to all the polls, your attendance will be noted for the accreditation process. At the conclusion of the presentation, the operator will provide instructions on how to submit a question through the conference bridge line. There will also be an evaluation after the question and answer session. We would appreciate it if you took a few minutes to fill it out so we can continue to improve our future sessions. Thank you again for joining the 2012 NHSC webinar series. We hope you will find this webinar useful in your daily efforts to provide service in your community. Now please welcome Dr. Alan Shelton, who will take us on a personal journey. Dr. Shelton.
Well, thank you very much, Barbara. It's my honor and privilege to be involved with the National Service Corps in this webinar now. This is a new thing for me, and they talk about old dogs and new tricks, but hopefully this will be helpful for those of you listening in. As Barbara said, I'm a family practice physician with the Puyallup tribe, which is a Native American tribe in Tacoma, Washington. We have an urban setting here, and we have a clinic where we take care of Native Americans in Pierce County. And I've been working there for a long time, almost 30 years now. So I'm going to be talking about burnout, and most of my observations and what I've learned about burnout come from my own personal experience. So I'll be telling you a little bit about my journey. Sometimes I start the session by asking if there's anybody in the group that has not burned out. And once in a while someone will raise their hand, and then I can say to them that they're at risk. So a very prevalent problem, and we'll be trying to explore a little bit about why, and hopefully as I share my journey, we can there'll be some take-homes for you. And I want to build up to a tool that I use now to handle stress, and then close with a little secret. So hopefully that'll be helpful for you. In my community, we deal a lot with addiction, and I often say that I'm in recovery now, that I was addicted to negativity. And you'll see how that plays out as we go through the talk. So let's get started. Hopefully you're able to see the slides as we go here. And the part of my work is I'm on faculty with Tacoma Family Medicine at Tacoma General in Tacoma. And when we have a situation or disease process, we do presentations, to the residents. And this is a case presentation. Like I said, I was going to be sharing from my own story, and this is a case that I know very well because it happens to have been me. So I like the part about the 49-year-old. This was as you can tell, this was a few years ago. Anyway, this physician presents to a colleague saying, "I can't do this anymore. I have no more energy for my work." The feeling is one of depleted energy. This person had been 20 years in a community clinic where he had started with idealism and enthusiasm. Those are good things. Hopefully you have those qualities as you work in your job. Unfortunately, they put us at risk, so we have to kind of look at that a little bit. It is becoming increasingly difficult to go to work, and while one is at work, they're always watching the clock, right? How much longer? A sort of a sense of nothing left to give, futility, frustration with political issues, frustration with administrative issues. I become the clinical director. And then frustration with certain patient issues. And you can see the next point, I began to recognize that I had a resentment toward certain of my patients. And I didn't, that made me feel guilty. I didn't anticipate that going into my work. Maybe that resonates a bit with you. And then ultimately, there's this sense of a minimal sense of accomplishment. One can say a loss of joy. And this is an important point, because you think about joy or passion for one's work, it's kind of an inner life thing. Turns out in the ancient Egyptian mythology, when you went to the other side, you were asked two questions. One question is, did you find joy in life? And the second question is, did you bring joy? So even in the ancient times, that quality is hugely important as to how one goes about one's life. In any case, this is a picture of burnout. It is very similar in many ways to depression, although burnout is usually associated pretty closely with one's work. A good question to ask is, how is the person on weekends or when they're away from work? And this individual, which was myself, I did fine on weekends, got up early and played hard. That might have been part of the problem. In any case, burnout is a prevalent stress syndrome. I can say a few things about this. Prevalence. JAMA did a study a couple of years ago about burnout in healthcare providers, and they said, depending on the study, it was somewhere between a third and half of all healthcare providers would describe themselves as being burnout. That's high prevalence. Certainly, another point is that it's a chronic stress syndrome. Sometimes I ask the group, well, who doesn't have stress? And it's kind of a joke. The only people that don't have stress are the ones that are buried over in the cemetery, right? If you're alive, you're going to experience stress. So the issue is managing that stress. Stress is there's this whole science about stress. It's interesting that at certain levels of stress, it actually improves one's effectiveness and efficiency. But those optimum levels are quickly passed, and most of modern man, they talk about stress being the malady of modern man. Most of modern man is well past the optimum point of stress, and they're in this adrenaline push. Stress, being stressed out, causes like 1,600 chemical reactions in your body. It pushes cortisol and adrenaline, inflammation, blood sugar control. And it's not a healthy place to be. We also talk about fight-flight. We're in this constant fight-flight situation when we're under chronic stress. So burnout being a prevalent stress syndrome, says the idea is a chronic stress. I mean, you might handle something, for a few weeks or something, but when it gets to be months or even years, it wears one down. And so there's three main symptoms. Exhaustion, we often think of physical exhaustion, and so one of the thoughts is for people to take a break, and sometimes that can be effective. But it's much more than that. A true burnout is more of an emotional, mental depletion. loss of creative energy, is loss of resiliency, loss of the ability to bring positive resources to a problem. The next symptom is this idea of detachment, and this is noticed. This is really important in healthcare because our ability to empathize and show compassion for a patient or client is a huge tool. It's very important in terms of how effective we are. Dr. Friccione, Chief of Psychiatry at Mass General, says that empathy is like a powerful drug that changes one's neurochemical ecology. It's kind of a cool phrase. It's a powerful drug. But if one is burnt out, one becomes detached and one is less able to show empathy. One thinks of a person as a disease process rather than the central human nature of that patient. Third symptom is this loss of satisfaction. So ultimately, right, people burn out and no longer want to be in careers that they've spent years and have invested large amounts in preparing for. It's sad to give my talk and have people come up afterwards and say that they spent all this time and money and their family's investment in them, and now they're in a career that they are unhappy in. So, what do we say about that? Well, well, let's just talk. I hate to wallow in the mud too much. We are going to a more positive place. But some of the other terms that might resonate with you for burnout, some people talk about a grief syndrome. In other words, during their pursuing of their career, they had a certain idea of what it would be like once they got out there. And now that they're out there, it's not at all what they anticipated. And this is a loss. Some people talk about compassion fatigue, where they give and give, and they don't. It isn't received in a good way, and they feel like they can't do that anymore. This cynicism is huge. Remember, I said I was addicted to negativity. Sometimes what you focus on grows. When you begin to see the negative, the difficulties, it begins to become pervasive, whereas all you can see are these negative things. So it's a pervasive negative lens, cynicism. And then burnout really is this whole sense of just depletion, just no energy left. And so some people talk about not having positive energy, and again, the addiction to negativity. So burnout becomes a prime factor in turnover, absenteeism, decline, morale, personal dysfunction. We've all heard of previously successful, outstanding individuals who've done something crazy. One of my favorite stories is a Dr. Baker, who's now an addictionologist in Vancouver, BC, but he used to be a family practice physician, and he tells it this way. I've heard him speak. He says, one cool autumn afternoon, with my waiting room packed and my exam rooms full, I quietly slipped out the back door. I think they found him in Las Vegas. Now, I had the impulse to slip out the back door, and maybe you had that too. Fortunately, it was just an impulse. When you act on something like that, there are dire consequences, including the loss of your job, sometimes your license. But worse than that, people that were counting on you suffer. So we have a hope here. Our hope is that we don't get that far into the morass of burnout, but that somehow it becomes a trigger for revitalization, as it was in my case. So on with the story. One thing that's helpful is to think of burnout. It's not like you're burnt out or not. There's really a continuum, really. If you think about positive energy for work. There's kind of a continuum, and the opposite of burnout is an interesting word. It'd be enthusiasm, which comes from the Greek about, let's see, the fire of the gods. It's kind of an inner life fire, enthusiasm. That's sort of a divine quality. It's kind of cool. Anyway, one can, got a little arrow here, maybe I can use that. One can find themselves, you know, like maybe you're having some good days, you're over here, and maybe once in a while you're down here, maybe on a Friday you're slipping on down, or on a Monday, Friday you're popping up here. So, but in other words, it's a continuum. The problem is when you find yourself bouncing on this left corner and having difficulty climbing out of negative energy. And that whole middle ground would be what we'd call malaise or job dissatisfaction. It's real common. Some people would call it an epidemic, and as we said, it's very prevalent, and it makes it hard. One could argue that there's hard to find minimal job satisfaction, let alone vitality and enthusiasm in the workplace. So why? What are the reasons that healthcare professionals burn out? And certainly there are many, and they mostly involve stressful situations. We can think of them quickly, rattle them off even, right? People come to us when they're their sickest. We work with life and death situations. There's productivity pressure. There's malpractice issues. There's a whole host of things that can be very stressful. But other jobs are stressful as well. So turns out in healthcare, there's a particular milieu even beyond the stressful situations that we find ourselves in. And so I want to mention these because I think they're important in terms of coming up with a plan or a way to prevent burnout in your own life. One of the issues is the sense of control. We often have responsibility in terms of our patients or clients, but we don't get to decide how long we get to spend with them. We're often told how long. We have to often operate in a system. So we have a fair amount of responsibility, but sometimes we don't have the kind of control that we wish we had to do a good job. Then we've talked about this suppression of emotion as well. To be an objective clinician, one is taught to suppress one's emotion. On the other hand, to be an empathic listener involves some engagement. And so there's kind of costs on each end. It's kind of a dance that people in healthcare find themselves in. Who are we? We've gone into healthcare. We're a special bunch. Most of the time, we're folk who value doing well in classroom settings and on tests and so on. We tend to be toward perfectionistic in our approaches. And so it's easy once we get out into our work that we feel a sense of inadequacy. If something didn't work out quite right, or someone can come along and say, well, you didn't do this with that client. So it's easy to carry a sense of inadequacy, particularly if patients don't do as well as we'd hoped. And there's another trait, folk that get into healthcare, and most of us are, one of our senses of our value or senses of self is that we're the helpers, and it's hard for us to say no in a good way when we're asked to help in a certain, and we're not very good with boundaries. And so we tend to do more than we should because we're asked, but instead of being able to say no in a good way when it isn't appropriate or when it isn't healthy for us, we tend to do it and then carry resentment. That's just a little bit of a milieu that ultimately puts us out of balance. I'm going to get back to, when we think about authentic peace and joy as aspects of healthy work energy, and the sense of balance. There's a couple things that we get trapped by. Some people talk about the 3 lies that we live by, that we are what we own, we are what others say about us, or we are what we do for a living. And the more we connect our sense of identity with these items, the further away we move from our essence, and the more chance of us being out of balance. I might get back to some of that. That's kind of a side thing. You might find it interesting. I want to get back to my case study. Remember this physician who's doing poorly. Now, remember the second characteristic of burnout is that one has detachment both from their clients and patients and staff. And so this individual was myself. I was getting increasingly cranky at work, and my staff were noticing. We're going to be generous and say that they noticed that I was not the Dr. Shelton that they knew and loved. And so they conspired to help me. I remember I'm working on an Indian reservation. And one day I had a call from the mental health department, our psychologist, who I had not talked to about my difficulty with burnout. And she said that the traditional healer, the medicine man, was at the organization for the day, and that he had a fail at noon. And wouldn't I like to see him? Now, this is awkward time on the phone. As you can imagine, I never it never occurred to me that I should see the medicine man, the traditional healer, as a patient. I knew they sometimes came by the clinic, and they saw some of our patients. I wasn't even sure what they did. Did they burn some sage? I didn't know. So I'm on the phone and trying to figure out how I can get out of this, being asked to see the healer at noon. So I said, well, I'd like to, but I think we have a meeting. And at that time, a couple of my nurses lined up there by the phone and said to me, no meeting today, Dr. Shelton. So that's when I realized that they were part of this conspiracy, as it were, to try to do something about this burnout doctor. So I was kind of stuck there with no meeting, and so I agreed to go. And I thought, well, maybe I'll be able to tell my story, and maybe in sort of unloading it, maybe I'll gain a little insight. And so I thought maybe it'd be useful that way. So I went to see the healer there at noon, and he was working in a small room at a table, an elderly gentleman with a white crew cut, Pendleton vest. He had a middle-aged son who had a long ponytail and a wispy beard, and he had an Indian drum, and he sat in the corner of this little room. And I came in, and he looked at me, and he looked down at his list, looked at me. He says, "You're Dr. Shelton." And I said, "Yeah." So now it's his turn to be awkward, right? Because he wasn't expecting to see the clinical director as his patient. And he said, "In order for me to help you, you have to believe in spiritual things." You see, his default was that as an MD, I probably didn't believe in spiritual things, and then he wouldn't be able to help me. So I said, "No, I was raised in a religious home, so I'm good there." So as I now understand it, I had a small understanding. And so he welcomed me in, and he said, "How can I help?" And I began by saying it's getting increasingly difficult for me to come to work. And then he put up his hand and said, okay, and he began to tell a story about his own father, who was a healer. And the story was interesting. It got increasingly long. And I realized I wasn't going to be able to tell any more of my story. My part was done. That kind of reminded me a little bit of some of my more traditional patients who come in and they say they're sick. And I say, well, what? Headache, stomach pain, what? And they go, you're the doctor, I'm the patient, you tell me, kind of thing. And it reminded me that, you know, the traditional healers, the medicine men, they work a lot intuitively, and they're not taking a medical history like I need. And then another thing that I noticed is that while he was telling his story about his father, every once in a while his son would drum the drum and go, ooh, as he beat the drum. Ooh. So I thought, well, that's an important point that he's making, and he's trying to emphasize it. So I thought this guy'd be good in my exam room. Mrs. Jones, it's time to quit smoking. Ooh, thought that might be beneficial. But we haven't really worked that out yet. Anyway, I'm just telling it this way because I wasn't there expecting anything. I was just interested, an interested observer. And then he said, let me see what I can do. And he came and stood over me and he began to sing the native type songs, the way the you've heard, you know, native songs. They're a high-pitched chant kind of song. And his son was drumming. And as he was doing that, I realized that this was the treatment, kind of a prayer song, as it were. And so I was sitting there thinking, make it work, because I was not happy with my condition. And when he was done, this is why I tell this story now, because this is the crux of my whole new approach. But when he was done, he said to me that my spirit was gone and that he had put it back. This sounded a little bit strange to me, as I didn't feel any different, and I was kind of curious as to where my spirit had gone. But I thought asking him that would be disrespectful. So I thanked him and returned to my afternoon of work. As I said, I didn't feel any different. As I began seeing patients, though, that's when I realized I was back. That was the sense I got. I had that creative energy where you talk with someone, you connect with them, you have a good sense of a problem-solving approach. It sounds good to the client. You enact the plan and you move on. As you work, you are invigorated by this almost seemingly effortless flow of good work. It's like being in the zone. And you've all experienced when you're doing your best work. You kind of feel like you're in a zone. And time starts to not be noticed. And I got double booked with a difficult patient, and there was some, clamor out at the front desk, and I went out, and I quickly came to me a way to resolve the situation, and everyone left happy, and we moved on. At the end of the day, I came out of a room, and it seemed like everyone was gone. I asked my nurse, "Where is everybody?" And she said, "Well, we're done. That was your last patient." Now that might not seem like a big deal, except that for the prior 2 years, you would never have had to tell me that I was seeing my last patient. I always knew that I had 2 more, because I was clock watching. I was trying to get done with my day. So that was kind of a cool feeling. And the next day at work, I announced that I'd seen the healer, and my spirit had been gone, and he'd put it back, and I was back. So it felt pretty good at that point, and I'm not sure how to explain it totally. I have some ideas, but I feel like I was jump-started. Remember that continuum of burnout and enthusiasm? I was kind of jump-started to the right side of that continuum. The problem with it is that I don't know that it even lasted 2 weeks. After a week to 10 days, I could feel myself slipping down the left side of that continuum back into my burnout, back into my malaise, back into my lack of authentic joy at work. And so I began to think, well, I can't go back to see the healer every 2 weeks. It might not happen. It'll work next time, right? I mean, but more than that, I'd be ashamed, I guess. I felt like I'd been given a clue. And it was time to start exploring. What did this mean that my spirit had gone? What is it about the health of one's spirit, or the focus or emphasis on one's spirit, that would make one be in a creative, energetic place at work or not? And so I began to explore that idea. And I now have this new, call it my thesis or theme, that the solution to burnout, a solution, right? There's probably many, can be found in the Native American concept of wellness. A well healthcare professional can maintain enthusiastic commitment to service, have this positive energy needed to give relational, empathetic care, and thus experience a fulfilling career. And so one could ask, well, what is wellness? And there's this idea, and this comes out of the addiction work in Native communities. They talk a lot about wellness. It's when all the aspects of one's lives are in balance and harmony. It's more than the absence of disease. One can have a chronic disease and be well, because it's about behavior, it's about attitude, it's about this authentic peace and joy. It's really an inner life concept. I consider this idea to be a gift to me from the Native community. It really talks about 4 aspects of life. And this can sound pretty simple, but it ends up being it ended up being a profound shift for me. Let's say it that way. We talk about the physical aspect of life. When one is healthy there, one is fit. There's the mental aspect of life. In a good place, that's called stimulated. The emotional aspect of life, when that is healthy, that's adjusted. There's also the spiritual quadrant of life. And when that is healthy, when that's in a good place, when that's functioning at optimum, the word for it is interesting. The word is this idea of being connected to some idea of the divine, and connected to others. And there's this little diagram here where the 4 areas overlap, but they in essence reflect different things, right? Physical is what one does, and mental what one thinks, emotional what one feels, and spiritual is what one believes. But one can address burnout from any of these aspects. Usually we think in terms of physical, and we would talk about taking a break or having a vacation from work. And I had taken increasingly long breaks when I was beginning to have more and more difficulty, and it just seemed like it only took a day or 2 when I got back for me to be back in the same spot. That wasn't solving it for me. Usually in our jobs we have lots of mental stimulation. Emotionally adjusted, we talk about friends, relationships. I had good friends and relationships. They were getting a little tired of hearing me complain. The spiritual aspect of one's life can be undernourished, underdeveloped, as it was in my case. And that's important because it ends up that the spiritual quadrant is the key, the foundation of the wellness circle. And it is that because from that concept of wellness, your spiritual aspect of yourself is your true essence. Pierre Chardin, the French philosopher, says, we are not physical beings having an occasional spiritual experience. but we are spiritual beings, and this lifetime is our physical experience. And to Native people, at least traditional Native people, this idea of spirituality is very central. It's not difficult for them to understand themselves as spiritual beings. They have this, it kind of shows in sort of the attitude toward their environment, the sense of gratitude and worship that they experience. And one sees this in terms of being awake to a divine presence. Now, is this religion? And this is important. I want to stress this. What I'm talking about in terms of spirituality is not religion. Spirituality and religion are related. They're intertwined, but they're not the same thing. If indeed humans are spiritual beings, that spirituality would have preceded religion, and that would be the reason that religions, which would be institutionalized belief systems, organized around perhaps dogma and ritual, that these would be developed over time. Ideally, religion should be thought of as a bridge. One's religion should help one be a spiritual, to be healthy spiritually. And what is healthy spiritually? Again, to have a sense of connection to the divine, to something beyond oneself, and to others. Unfortunately, some people get too attached to the bridge, and they miss the point. And so that, because of that, religion can help one be more spiritual. Religion can also hinder one's spirituality, perhaps by making one feel guilty and therefore not connected to the divine, or by making one feel judgmental and not connected to others. So what is spirituality then? A little more about it here. Belief systems involving mystery and faith are important attributes. Focuses on intangible elements, right? You don't find these authentic peace and joy under the microscope. But one's spirituality brings purpose and meaning. And it's when we begin to face death that we begin to think about our spirituality, our purpose and meaning. And I probably didn't mention, but when I was talking to the traditional healer, and he was talking about his own father, who was a healer, and when he was about to pass to the other side, that I think that's what he was trying to do to me, to begin to have me think about my true essence in that way. Although at the time I didn't think his story had much to do with me. It's funny. One thing I want you to think about in terms of spirituality, some people talk about it as a journey from ego to essence. And remember those three lies we talked about. You are what you own. You are what others think about you. You are what you do. Those are all tied up in our ego. And the journey, spirituality is a journey from ego to essence, is this journey to a deeper place than those superficial qualities. Another thing that's important to remember is the concept of all great spirituality is somehow about being open. There's this idea of trust. It's a huge, or faith, which is a huge spiritual attribute. Anyway, as we go, you'll understand why I bring up those points, because ultimately this all ties to how one can have more joy at work. This is difficult for healthcare professionals like myself, this whole concept of spirituality. We have traveled the path of science. Modern medical education chooses logical, analytical, and rational approaches, and for good reason. But because of that, we value the mind, and this has created a cultural tendency through our training and so on, where we tend to deny this room for mystery or faith, and potentially can leave one spiritually undernourished or out of balance. At this point, I'd like to read something I ran into. I don't know if any of you have heard of Dr. Stanislav Grof. Stanislav is a MD and a PhD who's done 40 years of research in consciousness states. So some would consider him a scientist. But in any case, he was given an award, an international award for his work at the University of Prague a couple years ago. And in his acceptance speech for this award, he said what I try to say in my talks. This is right on point, so I have to give this guy a few sentences. Materialistic science, he says, does not have a place for any form of spirituality and considers it to be essentially incompatible with the scientific worldview. It perceives spirituality as an indication of lack of education, superstition, gullibility, primitive magical thinking, or a serious psychopathological condition. Modern consciousness research, however, shows that spirituality is a natural and legitimate dimension of the human psyche and of the universal order of things. However, it is important to note that this statement refers to direct, authentic spirituality based on personal experience and not to the ideology and dogma of organized religion. So he's also making a distinction between spirituality and religion. And then he says this: new observations show that this dimension of the human psyche, this consciousness that one calls spirituality, is not a phenomenon of matter. It's not a product of complex neurophysiological processes in the brain, but a fundamental primary attribute of existence. So what we have this scientist saying, similar to the philosopher Chardin saying, is that there's something else going on in our physical beings beyond matter. There's consciousness research is showing some evidence of this thing called spirit. I thought that was kind of cool. Anyway, so as we move forward here, I'm discovering at this time that perhaps one of the reasons I'm having difficulty at work with burnout is that I have not been nurturing or developing or nourishing the spiritual quadrant of my wellness circle. One could say that I'm a spiritual midget and that I need my spirit put back, as it were. And so how does one develop or nurture or nourish that spiritual quadrant in one's life? And so I knew how to get physically fit. So I'm going to take an analogy of getting physical fit and we'll apply it to the spiritual quadrant. Got to talk about an exercise, talk about a diet, and about avoiding certain bad habits. Like one could say the habit of smoking would be a habit that blocks physical fitness. So we'll start with the exercise. Now in the spiritual quadrant, one cannot expect to have a healthy spirituality without some kind of this exercise. And the exercise is some kind of prayer or meditative practice. Everybody has a different kind of practice that will work for them, and there are many kinds. But if one isn't doing any kind of practice at all, one is not nurturing one's spiritual self. Same as with exercise, you wouldn't expect to be physically fit if you were never doing any exercise. I was at where I was learning about this wellness circle. I was at a Native American conference, and there was this one group I was in, and there was one gentleman who had this sense of presence about him, and the others, the default was that he must be a medicine man. Every time he said anything, everybody was real, careful to listen. He had this sense of wisdom and peace. And so one of the young men said, "Are you a medicine man?" to him. And he had this interesting response. He said that he was not a medicine man, but every day he took time out to thank his Creator for a new day and to ask the Great Spirit to walk with him that day. And I had been out for a run that morning doing my physical exercise, and I had seen him sitting on a meadow area having his spiritual practice where he was saying his daily prayer. So it's no surprise then, right, that one wouldn't have spiritual power without some kind of daily discipline. And this is when I learned about meditation. If one had told me 5 years before I went through my recovery process that it would be beneficial for me to sit quietly and try to center below my thoughts, I would have thought that that was a waste of time. But as it turns out, it's a very valuable practice. Allowing meditation can be very powerful. Brings an increased sense of well-being and energy as one connects with their center. And there can also be a sense of connection to the divine. And turns out it changes one's neurochemical ecology, a cool phrase. Remember, we talked about how stress puts us in the fight-flight. A prayer practice, a meditation practice, moves us to a place called resonance. And part of that is through this idea of the relaxation response. Came out of Harvard in the mind-body studies, but actually a cardiologist talked about relaxation response. But it's this idea of shutting down the mind's busy chatter, a physiologic shift to peace, opposite of fight-flight. And turns out it strengthens the immune system, one sleeps better, lowers blood pressure and cortisol levels. The idea is that you can actually move to a place of resonance. So in opposition to the fight-flight, one can move to a place of resonance through a prayer or meditation practice. Okay, so that's the exercise. I want to say a few things about diet now. Just like one can block good fitness through a bad diet, particularly junk food, one can block spiritual connectedness or spiritual health by how they feed their spirit. There's a great story about the Cherokee grandfather who tells his grandson he has two wolves fighting inside him. One wolf is love and peace and joy, and the other wolf is anger and hate and lust. And the grandson's quite alarmed, right? He says, well, which wolf wins? And the grandfather says, the one that I feed the most. Again, that idea that there are things that we do, things that we are involved in that can feed our spirit or not. So how do we feed our spiritual lives? Well, for everybody it's different, right? But many people talk about being out in nature, hiking or gardening. These are important things. Ceremony, certain kinds of ceremony, certain kinds of church services, perhaps inspirational reading material, certain kinds of music. If you haven't had an experience of being transcended by beautiful symphony, you haven't had the full human experience, right? The key is that, you know, these are almost happen in our lives by accident. We aren't very good about scheduling these kinds of things in, and we all know what the best things are for us. Each person's different. It takes time, and so it really is important to schedule these things into our lives. The next thing I want to talk about is certain habits that, just like smoking is a habit that blocks physical fitness, there's certain habits that block our spiritual health. And I'm going to mention 3 that were particular problems for myself that I had to deal with to get on the path of recovery, as it were. And we'll start with this idea of complaining. Complaining is common and easy. It's sort of this initial reflex. Turns out folk have studied human conversation, and 75% of our human conversation can be categorized as a complaint. So we like to complain to each other. It seems like a fun thing to do sometimes. Problem with it is if you want to have spiritual health, this blocks spiritual health. I was challenged to count the number of times that I complained in a day. I don't know if any of you have had this experience. And so I thought, well, that would be a good thing to do. Maybe I'd do better than someone else. So the idea was that the next day I would count the number of times I complained. Well, it started off badly when the alarm went, and as I awoke from my sleep, I said, oh, applicative, and hit the snooze button. And there was a little ding in my head that said, you know, today's the day we're counting complaints, and that's one. Like, oh, okay. I got out of bed, went and opened the curtain, looked out the window. It's raining again. Bing. That's two. And I'm thinking, I've only had two thoughts. I'm trying to be honest, you know, about counting my complaints. And I said, well, it's early. Maybe I can recover. And got in the shower, was feeling good, nice warm water. And at the time, one of my sons, who was less not very motivated at the time, I got up and flushed the downstairs toilet. My water went cold, and I jumped out of the shower and threw a fit. And then I realized, oh yeah, today's the day I'm counting my complaints. I really blew it on that one. So at that point, I kind of raised the white flag. You know, if anything isn't just Jake, I tend to have this negative response. And what's wrong with that? I already asked that. Problem is, it's opposite of gratitude. And gratitude, it turns out, is a central aspect of spiritual health. Why? Because spiritual health is about trust, about being open. And if one is complaining, one blocks that. Turns out gratitude is an interesting concept. Just like I had a habit of seeing the negative, one can develop a habit of gratitude. I began to journal each day, things I was thankful for at the end of the day. And you begin to see things differently. There's a guy named McCullough out of University of Miami who talks about benefit finding. Folk that are under stressful situations, if they can find benefit, if they can find that silver lining, if they can focus on the positive aspect of if a problem isn't a problem but an opportunity, they do much better. It's that whole idea of having gratitude in one's life. Everything you complain about, when seen in a different way, you can actually be thankful. When I was unhappy with the alarm going off, I could be thankful that I had another day. They aren't guaranteed at this point. When I opened the window or the curtain and saw that it was raining, I could be thankful I live in the beautiful green Northwest. When my son got up, flushed the toilet, hey, he's up. Possible in any situation to find something to be thankful for in it, and we'll come back to that because it's so important. But gratitude is actually a science of gratitude. It induces this physiologic state called resonance. Now, we've talked about that before, right? This is the opposite of the fight-flight. One can reach a place of resonance through a prayer meditative practice. One can also reach a place of resonance through gratitude. It's remarkable that if you're upset or angry or frustrated, if you sit down and you just write down 3 or 4 things you're thankful for, you will feel this physiologic shift, because you're shifting. Being frustrated and angry, you're in fight-flight, and you would be shifting to this place of resonance. So if you haven't experienced that, you got to do that sometime. It's associated with lower blood pressure and heart rate. It significantly increases natural antibodies, promotes healing. This comes from studies on kidney transplant, kidney recipients in transplant situations. It's shown to increase happiness at that point. We might be able to have time at the end to talk about that. I want to say one more thing. I don't know if anyone here has heard of this organization called HeartMath before, but this is an organization that has looked at heart rate variability in adults. And at the normal setting, your heart rate variability is very sporadic. Um, Erratic, sporadic, the graph. Um, and if one is particularly angry or upset, when you're in fight-flight, it gets more and more peaked and spiked, this heart rate variability graph. But curiously, if one centers and breathes like one would in a meditative practice, slow breathing, and if one adds this sense of gratitude, and the way they describe it as appreciative thoughts, when you put those two together, your heart rate variability begins to resemble a sine wave. Basically, it's being in this place of resonance. So the combination of those two things is a beautiful antidote to fight-flight. Okay, a couple more quickly because this is part of my tool, so I have to mention these things, but I'll try and go through them quickly. Another issue that blocks spiritual health is resentment. We've all been hurt in some way, sometimes our families, and it's easy to carry grudges. It's easy to talk about other people. It's easy to seek revenge. The problem with that is that kind of bitterness hurts us. It poisons the spirit, closes the heart, as it were, and blocks spiritual health because it blocks trust, right? You can't be open if you're resentful. The opposite is forgiveness. And forgiveness is a complicated topic, but one of the important things to mention about it is that it's not forgetting, condoning, excusing, or reconciliation. It's often misunderstood. But what it is the act of the heart of one that has been hurt, where they can let go, a release of bitterness that can bring peace of mind. Decreasing depression, again, has been studied scientifically. Decreasing depression, decreasing anger and stress hormones, moving one again to this place of resonance. If you have to forgive someone that you're having difficulty doing, it's helpful to remember that people act out of the condition of their lives. It's an important concept. Resentment's a big deal. The writer Francis Scoville Shin says that the lack of forgiveness is the greatest cause of all disease, so much so that one should not ask what is wrong with you, but who is wrong with you. That's kind of a curious thing. I haven't started asking my patients who is wrong with them yet. But certainly for some of them, the resentment in their lives is not helping them be healthy. Okay. The third habit that can block spiritual health is this idea of worry. Quickly, worry is a common issue for modern man. We know this by the number of anxiolytics we prescribe, right? It's the highest drug prescribed in America. It's common in medical staff. We worry about our clients and our patients. And the opposite is peace. So how do we move from anxiety to this sense of peace, which would be more of a spiritual attribute? Mindfulness is a huge tool, a great concept. For most people that are anxious, they're anxious about something that is going to happen, they're afraid is going to happen or might happen, and so it takes them out of the present moment. And when we concentrate and focus on the present, it's usually a beautiful moment. And we can hold the issue that we are frustrated about in awareness as opposed to holding it in anxiety. So when you hold it in anxiety, it disrupts this present moment. Thich Nhat Hanh, the Vietnamese Buddhist priest, has a great mantra that I've learned. He says, breathing in, I calm body and mind. And breathing out, I smile. Dwelling in the present moment on the next breath. Dwelling in the present moment, next breath out. I know this is a beautiful moment. And that's that idea of being present in the moment without a curious awareness, not attachment. a very helpful tool. People can be taught this. Another way from anxiety to peace of mind, this idea of breathing, just 4 deep centering breaths begins to move someone. Now, anxiety, remember, is in fight, flight, and peace is in resonance. And you can move physiologically from fight, flight to resonance by calm breathing. Prayer is a spiritual tool where one lets go to the divine. However they understand the divine, as one lets go, one is able to move to trust and move to peace and move to resonance. So I keep talking about this fight, flight versus resonance, and the reason is because I'm going to this tool. It isn't, it's because it's practical. So this is the tool now that all that I've said so far is introduction to this. This is how I'm able to stay in recovery and be at my work now in a new place of hopefully more joy than before. And the idea is shown by this slide, where we have the reactive self. This is our ego self based on fear and ego. This is when we're in fight flight. We know we're in fight flight when we notice complaining, resentment, or anxiety. Whereas we all have a true self. This is the self that comes out of our deepest place of love and wisdom. And I consider this to be our more mature spiritual stuff, our spirit, where it can be developed, it can be nurtured, or it can be ignored. But spirituality, remember we talked about spirituality being the journey from ego to essence. And our essence is this true self that comes from a place of love and wisdom. And in this place, we find gratitude, forgiveness, and peace. So with that background and what I've told you so far, one would recognize that the reactive self, when we're in this self, we're in a place of fight, flight, we're in a place of stress, and when we're in our true self, we're in a place of resonance. How does one move from the reactive self to the true self? And why would that make a difference? Okay, so now I need to show you some examples of how you can use this tool. And the best example I have, although I use it for every situation now, the best example I like to talk about is when I used to come to work and I would look at my schedule, and once in a while I would look in there, 2 o'clock, oh, it's Mrs. Jones, a difficult, demanding patient that I've had to argue with about pain meds with. Hopefully you all have some Mrs. Joneses in your life to teach you this tool. In any case, so the way you begin is you recognize that you're in your reactive self. Here I'm complaining. I need to get my little arrow out here. Oh, I've kind of lost it. Sorry. Anyway, I'm complaining about Mrs. Jones being there at 2 o'clock. I resent her. I'm anxious about the visit. I'm frustrated. I'm depleted. When you feel this sense of, oh, that's that depleted sense that it's no good to spend the day in that place, right? So I have to use my tool now when I discover I'm in this place to move to a better place. First thing you do is find what you can be thankful for in the situation. And when we have a group setting, I often ask the class, for ideas. I don't care what you're dealing with that's difficult. It could be a divorce. It could be a situation with one of your children. It could be a situation with your parents. It could be a situation with your job. No matter how difficult, there are some things you can find to be thankful for about it. And that's that benefit finding that McCullough out of the University of Miami has studied. Anyway, there's sort of what we call low-hanging fruit, and then there's the ultimate fruit. And you begin by thinking of the low-hanging fruit. The low-hanging fruit there's 2 categories of things you can be thankful for. The first category is it could be worse kinds of things. I can be thankful that I only have one Mrs. Jones on my schedule today. I can be thankful I only have to spend a half hour with her. I can be thankful I only have to see her once in a while. I don't have to go home to her after work. A number of those kinds of things. Be thankful most of my patients aren't Mrs. Joneses. They're patients I care about and that we have good interaction. And then, as you begin to think of those things, you begin to shift. You begin to shift to resonance. And then you can think of the more difficult or the more evolving things to be thankful for. These are the things that help you grow. You can be thankful that you have an opportunity to learn how to deal with a patient like Mrs. Jones. You can be thankful you have another chance to do better this time. You can be thankful that there could be a different outcome. There could be some growth or development, some learning, that kind of thing. And as one begins to think about those things, one begins to realize they can be thankful that they are not Mrs. Jones. That's even more evolved, right? Because Mrs. Jones is the way she is because of all the things that have happened to her in her life. And I didn't have to have all those things happen to me. And that's that part where you begin to move to forgiveness because remember, the way to move to forgiveness with someone is to recognize that people act out of the circumstance of their life. And so that moves us into this next spot where, who do I resent? Well, I resent Mrs. Jones. Why? You know, she's acting out of the circumstance for her life, so I can shift toward forgiveness there. And as I extend grace in that way, I can also, who else do I need to forgive, right? I felt guilty about my resentment toward Mrs. Jones, and I can receive some grace myself and forgive myself. And then there's another one where I talk about sometimes, who else do I need to forgive? There's the reception staff. You know, how could they schedule her with me again? Kind of. That's kind of a funny one. They're just doing their job, right? So you can see how you're shifting here with these kinds of. Now, some people say, well, isn't this just cognitive therapy? And yeah, I guess in some ways it would, but I would argue that you aren't able to do this kind of thing if you haven't been taking care of your. This is a deep thing. There's some depth to this. If you've been doing your practice, some kind of prayer, meditative practice, if you've been feeding your soul in the right way, you have a lot more resource for this tool. And when you begin to use this tool, it's more effective. If you've been nurturing your spiritual self. So I think there's a little spiritual depth here that isn't just cognitive thinking. It's deeper than your brain, as it were. We're trying to move our neurochemical ecology, our physiology. We're moving to a place of resonance. And that last one, the anxiety and peace. Remember, it was a 2 o'clock visit. If I carry a 2 o'clock unhappiness about a 2 o'clock appointment into my 8 o'clock visit, I'm not going to be fully present at my 8 o'clock visit. And that's that idea of mindfulness where we can be in the moment and appreciate right now without messing up the present with anxiety about. Anxiety is usually about something we think might happen or that we're worried about in the future. So that idea of mindfulness, say the Thich Nhat Hanh mantra, or breathe. As one breathes and centers, one begins to move to a place of peace. Saying a prayer is a way to let go and trust. So that's the tool I now use, and I get a lot of practice with this tool because I frequently find myself in frustrating or difficult situations where I get annoyed or anxious, and I find this tool to be very helpful. When I'm in my true self, when I'm in this place, when I'm coming from this place of love and wisdom, two really special things happen. 2 o'clock visit comes, I've done my little, background work, I've got myself in a better place. I say a prayer inviting the divine to be with me as I go into this room. When I'm in the room with the patient, if I'm in this space of resonance, and I'm in this space where I'm coming from a place of love and wisdom, two special things happen. First thing that happens is that I have more creative thinking. I think it's intuitive. I call it intuitive guidance. Ideas come to me about options, alternatives, or where to proceed, because I'm not attached emotionally. And that's the second thing that happens. No matter what the patient says or does, I don't have to take it personally. That's a huge burden, to take things personally that patients say and do to me. Now, this doesn't mean that one is doormat and allows people to abuse them or anything like that. If someone's speaking to you abusively, you can say, just a minute, you know, I want to work with you, but I can't under this condition. I'm going to step out and I'm going to come back in, and I need you not to, you know, speak to me in that way. That kind of thing. One time, soon after I began using this tool, I stepped into a room and a patient was very angry. Says, I've had this headache forever and you all have done nothing for me. Now, if I was in my old reactive self, I would have said, well, I can tell by the chart you have been in here a few times, and there's been a number of things people have done for you. So don't say we haven't done anything for you. I'd have gotten defensive, you know. And if you're that unhappy with us, then, you know, there's another clinic down the road. That would not have been helpful, obviously. But I had said my mantra, and I was in a different space. And when she started out angrily at me, I understood she was acting out of the circumstance of her life, and I did not take it personally. That's such a gift. And so I said to her, well, I'm sorry that you still have your problem. Let's start over. And when I came back to her in a non-defensive, kind way, her anger melted, and we were able to have a good encounter. When I'm in my best true self, I'm open to intuitive guidance, and ideas can come. I hope you get the opportunity to try this out. To me, this represents the gift of spirituality, and the reason I call it that is that it's by working on my spiritual life that's allowed me to have some resource to use this kind of tool. Okay. It's time to move on a little bit. We want to get done so we can hopefully respond to some questions. The secret. This comes from the book The Little Prince. It's only with the heart that one sees rightly, for what is essential is invisible to the eye. The whole idea that the inner life, our essence, is invisible. But that's what's essential. And that our happiness and well-being ultimately are determined by our inner world, not by our circumstance, by our inner world. Now, our circumstances may be difficult, but it's our inner world that teaches us how to respond and perhaps change those circumstances in a good way. And this is what I use to exemplify that. We've all seen this little equation from biology, right? You got the S for stimulus, and the R for response. You stimulate a one-cell organism the same way, it'll always respond the same way. And as humans, we often think that's us. You know, our situation defines or creates our response. And that's what marketing uses, right? If only we had a better house, a better car, a better spouse, perhaps, then you would be happy. That kind of idea. And as we mature, we realize that that isn't true. In any case, for humans, we have this other, I'm going to try and use, not very good at using that arrow. For humans, we have the formula is a little different. There's the catalyst symbol, the change agent on top of the arrow there. And basically, our inner life determines. We can have a certain kind of situation, but it's our inner life that determines our response. As Viktor Frankl says, that who wrote about the concentration camps, that our last human freedom really is being able to choose one's attitude, one's interpretation, and one's meaning in any given circumstance. There's a great parable that I like about the guy interviewing the stone cutters that are working on a building. And he interviews the first one. Tell me about your job. And the first one says, my job is awful. It's hot and dusty, and it's cutting one block of stone after another. Terrible job. He goes, okay. Goes to the next guy. Tell me about your job. The guy goes, well, this is a hard job, but with it, I'm able to make some money to feed my family. And he goes to the third guy. Tell me about your job. And the third guy says, we are building a cathedral that will be a place of blessing for people for many, many years. Clearly, each person has a different interpretation of their situation, which determines their response. I want to go back a second. This doesn't mean that when one's in a difficult place, that they just are a doormat. Remember, I did say that. When you're dealing in a situation, when you're in your true self, that's when you can be quiet and ask for guidance on what to do if you're in a difficult situation. One time after I finished my talks, one fellow said to me, well, what does this mean? I have to stay in this job that I hate? I said, no, it doesn't mean that, but leave in a good way. You know, if you're being led to say this isn't the job for you, get quiet, get into your true self, ask for guidance. What can you do? Can you change your hours? Can you change your emphasis at work? Can you do some job training? Can you do something to change something about it? Or do you actually need to begin looking for something else? But do it in a good way. Don't just walk out the back door. So that's the idea. You can get guidance on how to proceed if your situation is difficult. Okay, I'm going to skip past that, talk about the happiness set point, just quickly that, you know, we all are, as President Lincoln said, we're all pretty much as happy as we've decided to be. And that's what they found, that your happiness, everybody has a happiness set point. It's a consistent measurement. And it can be elevated by even the best things. Winning a championship, having a baby can elevate your happiness set point, but at most for a few weeks. And then you get used to that new situation, and you go back to your usual happiness set, your usual level of happiness. However, there is one thing that has been shown by research to elevate one's happiness set point, and that is gratitude. So I would argue that perhaps any inner life attribute that moves one to resonance can improve one's happiness set point. So I'm trying to encourage you in some way to nourish and nurture your own spirituality, to use the gift that brings to improve your ability to stay at your workplace with greater passion and greater joy. Okay, I hope there's some time for some questions.
Rashonda, can we start question and answer, please?
At this time, ladies and gentlemen, if you would like to ask a question, that is star, then the number 1. And there are none in queue at this time.
Well, if we don't have any questions, we'd like to thank you, Dr. Shelton, for sharing your journey with us tonight. And thanks to all the NHSC webinar participants. Please take a moment to fill out the on-screen evaluation that's coming up. Your opinion will help us further develop these webinars. Again, thank you for participating tonight, and fill out the questionnaire. Thank you.
This does conclude today's conference call. You may now disconnect.